We're going to be joined in just about an hour by Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game. In the meantime, I've got a lot of material to cover on some other topics between now and then. But just a reminder, if you've got a question or comment for Kelton today, stick around. He's very good about handling those questions as they come in. And even if he doesn't have the answer, he usually does a little research on it and can get back to people very quickly on all of that. In the meantime, got a stack of material today that I was compiling in the last 24 hours. I had said earlier this week that Hillary Clinton's comment about the basket of deplorables, and she was referring to, what did she say, about half the people who support Donald Trump. So that would be 50% out of the, 100 million. So 50 million people she's lumping into that. She made that comment at a fundraiser. Can I point this out? Fundraiser apparently was sponsored by Barbara Streisand, but it was for the LGBT community. Now, there was a time in American history when a cross-dresser was actually viewed as perhaps being a little deplorable. Now we're much more sympathetic. We think that they're just plain nuts, that there's a mental illness or something going on. But how far we've come, that people who are angry about their jobs going overseas are now called deplorables. And the people who'd like to go to your local Target store and videotape women in the dressing room, they're considered to be the people who are okay. So I said at the time, though, that Clinton's remarks, I never believed that Mitt Romney's comment about the 47% a few years ago really had any impact on the outcome of the election. Media says it did because media thinks it has some sort of power to convince you or sway you in how you're going to vote. But I really don't believe that exists any longer. I think people they've gotten accustomed to this over the last 20 years. They realize that they're being sold a bill of goods and who's selling it to them. The media right now, according to a research released yesterday, and this comes out on a yearly basis, the public confidence in mainstream media, once again, at an all-time low. It just drops every year. People have so little trust for what they're reading in the newspapers, what they're watching on TV news, in many cases even see on the internet any longer, that they just don't have any faith in it. So, but that's a good thing in the long run because more and more people make up their own minds without someone else telling them how to do it. But I didn't think the Clinton deplorable line was going to have any sticking power, and especially after she nearly dropped dead on Sunday morning. I thought that the deplorable story would go away very, very fast, but honestly, it hasn't. Now, it may not hurt her among the LGBT crowd and among a great many smarmy liberals because they've already thought that about anybody who's not a smarmy liberal like them. And it's not going to impact the votes of the people who already backed Trump. But there is a group of people in the middle, the independents they're called, and those are the people at this stage of the game that the Clinton and Trump campaigns are fighting for because you get a big share of the independents, you end up winning the Electoral College, and you become the next president. That's how that ends up working. Dan Henninger, who writes for the Wall Street Journal, also is a frequent guest on Fox News talking about economic issues, has a column called Wonderland, which appears once a week in the Wall Street Journal. And he says that Mrs. Clinton later tried to back down and say that, well, these are people who feel the system's been gamed against them. A little bit like when Barack Obama said that people in flyover country were bitter clingers, clinging to God and guns. Henninger writes, Mrs. Clinton is right that they feel the system has let them down. There is a legitimate argument over exactly when the rising digital economy started transferring income away from blue-collar workers and toward the creative class of Google and Facebook workers, no few of whom are smug progressives who think the landmass from business class between San Francisco and New York is pocked with deplorable phobic Americans. Naturally, they'll vote for the status quo, which is Hillary Clinton. But in the 8 years available to Barack Obama to do something about what rankles the lower middle class, white, black, or brown, the non-employed and underemployed grew. A lot of them are going to be voting for Trump because they want a radical mid-course correction, which Mrs. Clinton isn't and will never be. Hillary's comments suggest they now see much of the population as a cultural and social abstraction. To repeat, that abstraction is racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, and Islamophobic. Donald Trump's appeal, on the other hand, is that he cracks back at the progressive cultural condescension in utterly crude terms. Nativists exist, and the sky is still blue, but the overwhelming majority of these people aren't phobic about a modernizing America. They're fed up with the relentless moral superciliousness of Hillary, the Obamas, progressive pundits, and 19-year-old campus activists. And he says her supporters say it's Donald Trump's rhetoric that is divisive, but just so, it's rich to hear them claim that their words and politics are inclusive. And he concludes himself, so is the town dump. Right, we're inclusive, but the rest of you are all a bunch of knuckle-dragging Neanderthals. This morning, the Los Angeles Times shows Trump's lead nationally. Now, nationally may not mean a whole lot. That's popular vote, and of course, the election will be decided by the Electoral College. But Trump's lead, according to the LA Times, has now climbed from 5% to 6%. So every day, he's gradually chipping away at her. And it could well be that the election is going to turn on events just this week and next week. And if she stumbles one more time, I think that's all she wrote. This is from a writer at a publication called The Wink. Yes, The Wink. No, it's The Week, actually. His name is Damon Linker. He says, when speaking in public, a politician can be motivated by a range of goals. Clinton might be trying to persuade people to change their positions, to stop supporting another candidate and start supporting her. But not a single Trump voter would hear Clinton's words and conclude, you know what, I am deplorable, but I'm not irredeemable, and I'm going to prove it by dropping Trump and voting for Hillary Clinton. You get the point? She's not going to win any converts. That's his message is, if she was thinking that she somehow is solidifying her base, but this is going to be so close in this election, apparently, if she drives some of these people away by her comments about them, the condescension involved with it, she drives them away, then it's going to be all the more difficult for her. So she's been digging her own hole, if you will. I didn't say digging her own grave. That's a topic for another day. Ann Coulter, conservative columnist, writing at the Daily Caller. Coulter says that Clinton's advisors thought it was a killer line. It wasn't off the cuff, she says, because nothing is ever off the cuff with Clinton. It was part of her scripted remarks. And 3, Coulter says Clinton has used the remarks before. Nor did anyone in the media mind it one little bit. They've been calling Trump supporters racist for more than a year now. Calling other people racist is the media's favorite thing to do. Coulter says whenever the left talks about racism, it has nothing to do with what's good or bad for black people. It's just another event in the fabulous white people competition where black people are the chips. It never occurs to a hack, she writes, that someone else may have had the same idea, but as long as liberals are such perfect thermometers of deplorableness, could they tell us how many Muslims are deplorable? Specifically, what percentage are sexist or homophobic? Well, there's a question I guess they'd have some trouble answering on the other side, wouldn't they? How about this? This comes from Victor Davis Hanson, The Legacies of Barack Obama. On his recent Asian tour, President Obama characterized his fellow Americans, by the way, the most productive workers in the world, as lazy. He said that. He did. While he was in Laos. The attack on supposedly insular Americans was somewhat bizarre, he writes, given that Mr. Obama himself knows no foreign languages. So he's a pretty insular guy himself. He often seems confused about even basic world geography. His birthplace of Hawaii is not Asia, as he calls it. Austrians do not speak Austrian, and the Falkland Islands are not the Maldives. Those are all mistakes Mr. Obama has made in the past, but the media. Remember how media was last week with Gary Johnson? He didn't know what Aleppo meant. He can't possibly be the president if he didn't know what Aleppo meant. And yet here's Mr. Obama thinking that Austrians speak Austrian. Or that the Falklands, which are just off Argentina but owned by England, are the Maldives, which are halfway around the world. But we wouldn't know that because media has been trying to bury these things whenever he opens his mouth and something stupid comes out. Bury it for many years. But Hillary says you're all deplorable. Mr. Obama says you're all lazy. And these people are supposedly representing you. I'm telling you right now, we're in serious trouble if this gang gets another 4 years. Christian Post has this. Franklin Graham says I'm not deplorable to God, even if Hillary Clinton thinks so. Graham is taking the occasion to remind the public about the reality of sin, God's forgiveness, and the price Jesus paid on the cross. All sin is deplorable to him. The Bible tells us that we have all sinned, and the wages of sin, of course, would be death, right? So he says, God is holy and cannot tolerate sin, so much so that when Jesus carried our sins to the cross, God had to turn his back and could not even look on him. Now, when you're ticking off these people who've represented the views of traditional Americans for decades, there's 2 countries out there, really, isn't there? There's the smarmy country, what we used to call the hoity-toities, the swells, and then there's the rest of us. And frankly, if we don't get this thing settled in the next 4 years, a lot of us will end up spinning off and creating our own countries. I really do fear that. I think secession is the next big word we'll be hearing from the mouths of people in this country, especially if you get 4 years of Hillary Clinton. Dennis Miller appearing last night on the O'Reilly Factor. Bill O'Reilly, of course, hosting this program for many, many years on the Fox News Network. Miller says the media is also working overtime to try and deflect the story about Hillary Clinton's health.
You see how in the bag they are. They're now talking about Trump's health. How did this get to be Trump's health? I just don't understand that. Trump looks vital to me. She's the one who looks like she's walking around blocky in that Volvo pantsuit. She doesn't look healthy to me. They're carrying her up steps, for God's sakes. And all of a sudden it's, well, neither Trump or her will come clean about their health. Look at her. She looks like Tom Petty in the gravity of the planet Jupiter. What the hell's going on over there? And what is the option? Gary Johnson? Yeah, there's a genius. He thinks Aleppo is the fourth Marx brother.
You know, I don't know whether you watch the program, Miller. We pay you, but you don't have to watch it. It's optional. I admire Trump and Hillary Clinton for the stamina of just running around. I mean, you and I go on the road. After 2 shows, Miller and I are in an oxygen chamber. I mean, and these people are all over the place. I mean, don't you admire their stamina at all?
I don't admire anything whatsoever about Hillary Clinton.
Nothing.
Nothing.
No.
I think it's time for her to get out. For God's sakes, they'd let that woman run herself into the grave chasing the presidency. At some point, don't you want to go home and spend a couple years relaxing, Hillary? I know you've been helping me now for 2.5 decades. For God knows, your corruption is like the grandfather clock of corruption, ticking in the background through much of my adult life. I'm releasing you. You don't have to help me anymore. Go home, relax, enjoy something.
Dennis Miller speaking last night on the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News Channel and making some good points. We've got a short break, and then we've got more of the program coming up, but perhaps your thoughts on this subject as well. If you want to chat with me after the break, the telephone number is 736-0300. If you're hearing this program, thank you very much this morning. If you're having difficulty hearing the program, you need to give a telephone call to Dr. Christine Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. Did you know that your hearing health and the health of your brain are absolutely connected? At Mount Harrison Audiology, she's been studying the research on cognitive health and hearing. The most recent findings prove that when hearing loss is addressed with hearing aids, the effect of cognitive decline is greatly diminished. Hearing is critical, though, for communication, for connection to others, and for overall well-being. Now would be the time to improve your hearing. You can call Mount Harrison Audiology for an appointment. That number, 312-0957. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 20 minutes after 8, it's 43. I wanted to mention, starting next Tuesday, you'll start seeing on a weekly basis, I'll be taking over for Neil Larson as the conservative voice on the op-ed pages of the Magic Valley Times News. I think I've mentioned this before, and Neil decided to step aside. Probably in about 6 months he'll regret it, but he got sick and tired of all of the abuse from the liberals that would email him. I'm not worried about that at all. I've got pretty thick skin and a lot of it. I actually had to go there and get my photograph taken yesterday with a wide-angle lens. They wanted a portrait. And I thought about putting on a jacket and tie and shaving my beard and doing all of those things, but instead I put on a Hawaiian shirt, a ball cap, and sunglasses. And they took about a dozen pictures. Now, my guess is what will happen is they will pick the photograph that I least like, and they'll use that. But it's been my experience. Actually, I didn't even look at any of the photographs. It's just I'm more concerned about actually getting something written than the photograph. So I said, sure enough, take a bunch of pictures. We did that. And so that'll start next Tuesday morning. But I'm telling you, I do believe, and I give them credit, because the fact that they would like to at least have somebody occasionally offering a conservative viewpoint, fine with me. I do not think, though, that any of my initial columns are going to shock people to any serious degree. I don't see that happening. I'm breaking down some issues and discussing a few things. I really think that nobody out there will be even offended. Well, we'll have to see, because I know that liberals, wherever I've worked doing this, just the fact that my name pops up in conversation is usually enough to, bring steam out of their ears. I remember years ago I was at an event somewhere, and a friend of mine introduced me to somebody that he knew from their social circle. But he was a conservative. That didn't seem to bother her, but she was a liberal. But when he introduced me, she reached out, started shaking my hand, and then heard my name. And as she heard my name, her face went ashen white. I do believe she rushed off to the bathroom. I'd probably, look for some pumice so she could scrape that hand, probably raw, to get rid of any germs she thought she may have picked up. But I do believe it's necessary that we do have alternatives in this community, because the Colin Powell email hack, we've been hearing a lot about that. The headline in the paper today basically says, that Powell doesn't like Donald Trump. And yet, I've been looking through this email trove. Most of Powell's emails, and the person he likes least happens to be Hillary Clinton. So even while he's not a fan of Donald Trump and he thinks Trump's unqualified, he doesn't seem to have a whole lot of use for Hillary Clinton, and most of the emails deal with that, which shows you the mindset between liberals and conservatives. The liberals focus on the fact that Colin Powell, who's a Democrat, by the way, even though he worked for two Bushes and for Ronald Reagan, during an interview with 60 Minutes some years ago, Powell was mentioning that he didn't get too much into the political end of things while he was serving his presidents, but he mentioned that when he was a young officer in 1964, he bought one of the first brand new Mustangs when they came off the assembly line, and he got pulled over for speeding in the Deep South, which he was doing. He admitted that. But he said the deputy, groused about the fact that he had a Lyndon Johnson bumper sticker on the back of the Mustang. So Powell is a Democrat, but he's not fond of Hillary Clinton. That would be my headline, because the overwhelming number of emails in that trove that were released were actually dealing with that. And so I think that this is why we do need that conservative voice in this community from time to time. Speaking of the Colin Powell hack, Tim Kaine, who somebody joked this morning has been excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church automatically because of his positions, and actually, according to the Catechism of the Church, that makes absolute sense. But Tim Kaine was defending his girl against the Powell emails by trying to deflect. Take a listen for a moment and see what you think.
Just because some anonymous hacker who has committed espionage releases emails, I don't even know if they're true. So I'm not going to comment on them. I don't know anything about the emails. And somebody who would hack and commit espionage to come up with stuff, they could make up documents. I don't know that they're true.
In other words, it's the hacker's fault. Pay no attention to the Colin Powell pointing out that Hillary is a scurrilous liar. And he had a series of emails he exchanged back and forth with a big donor to the Democrat Party. And the donor detailed how the Clintons and the Obamas can't stand each other, which I think should be another part of this story. But Kaine, of course, is like, oh, hackers, bad, 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 bad. In other words, pay no attention to what the contents of those emails happen to be. I just, the notion, politicians obviously are trying to always deflect, and they do it on all sides. I understand that. Although I gave Donald Trump some credit yesterday while speaking in Flint, Michigan, and he went off the reservation and started talking about Hillary Clinton, and the preacher walked up to him and told him, hey, you were invited here to talk to the people and listen to them, not to talk politics. And Trump just simply said, oh, okay, that's fine, and went back to doing what he had been doing. And this is where I think he's beginning to look more and more presidential through all of this. There was the trip down to Louisiana when he observed the flooding. And then there was the trip to Mexico where he made the appearance with the Mexican president. Speaking of which, we'll have a related story on that coming up in a few minutes here on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, because get this. Got an email today from a fellow in Jerome County who stays atop these things. And it's a link to a story that says Mexico is now building a brand new border wall along its southern border to keep Guatemalans out. And did you know that Barack Obama has pledged your tax dollars to help pay for it? Yes. Mexico is building a border wall, and you're paying for it. Details on that on the way in just a few minutes. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 43.